Nice. Is he is he good at the games that he plays? Or or at least, well, sure. Oh no! Did you see that? I almost fell through the floor. I have no idea where a banana is. Holy crap.